Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Impress. Only 80 days now till the World Championship match between Carlsen and Caruana. We will keep counting down towards the big event, the 47th match for the World Championship, by looking at all 46 events prior to Carlsen-Caruana. We have arrived in 1910 when world champion Lasker defended his title against Carlsen-Schlechter from Austria. Let's see how this came about. These are the two players, Schlechter on the left and world champion Lasker on the right. The list of challengers waiting for their turn was growing every day in those years, and following tournament successes, Schlechter traveled to Berlin in November 1908 to challenge Lasker, who accepted his challenge. Schlechter's style of play was strategic and positional and risk-averse. His nickname was the King of the Draw. Initially, the players announced that the match would last 30 games, but then due to the lack of funds, the number of games was reduced to 10 instead. And some people think that 12 games in a Carlsen-Caruana match is not enough to determine who's the strongest, and that in the old days everything was better and longer. But in 1910, Lasker and Schlechter only played 10 games. The match took place in Vienna and Berlin and started on January 7th, 1910, and it turned out to be the most dramatic World Championship match played up to that point. And there is still some controversy about this match. Was there a clause that Schlechter had to win by 2 points? That would be quite outrageous, but it might have been. Some chess historians say it was, some say it wasn't. It was definitely a clause when the match was supposed to be 30 games, but we don't know if that clause was still there when it was decided to only play 10 games. These are the results. As you can see, 8 of the 10 games were drawn. The King of Draws made many draws, but he won game 5 and went into the last game with a 1-point advantage. He only needed a draw in the last game to win the match, but there's that clause again. Did he need to win that last game to win the match by 2 clear points and become world champion? We probably will never know. In this video we will look at that last dramatic game, Game 10. It was played on the 8th of February 1910, and this game lasted a total of 3 days and a total of 11 hours. It was adjourned twice. Lasker was white and played d4, and that was for the first time in a match that he did not play e4 on the first move. d5, c4, c6. Schlechter plays a Slav defense. Knight f3, knight f6, e3 and g6. And what is this called? Well, it's called the Schlechter variation of the Slav. And this was its birth, the first time it came on the board. A novelty. Schlechter said, I did not want to play for a draw in the last game and I chose a little known continuation, leading to interesting complications. And why did he not play for a draw? Maybe because there was a clause that he needed to win by 2 clear points. As I said, we'll never know. Knight c3, bishop g7, bishop d3, Schlechter castled, queen c2, and the knight went to a6. Schlechter calls this very boldly played, and he says that knight bd7 is more solid. And Kasparov, in his book My Great Predecessors, says yes, more solid and also much more passive. The threat is now knight b4 to fork these two pieces and gain the bishop pair. So a3 is played to stop knight b4. Schlechter took on c4, bishop takes, and b5, which Kasparov calls an irreparable weakness. And Max Euwe, the 5th world champion, comments that knight c7 would have been better in that position. Bishop dropped back, and b4. Kasparov writes another nervy, impulsive decision. Knight a4 from Lasker, and Kasparov explains that there's no point in winning a pawn here, with bishop takes a6 instead, bishop takes and then a takes b4, because then there is queen c8 with the idea of queen g4, and good compensation for black. Kasparov prefers knight a4 and writes, after the move from the game, black has a dead knight on a6, a queen side full of holes and a strategically lost position. The challenger's opening experiment has been a failure. Lasker's better here. Schlechter took on a3, and if you now take on c6, that's not good, because of knight b4 hitting the queen. You can take the rook, but then knight takes d3 check, followed by queen c7 with a winning attack for black. So Lasker did not take on c6, he took back on a3. Bishop developed, rook on the open file, queen c7 and knight e5. And Kasparov writes, it would appear that having failed to win any of the 9 previous games, Lasker had partly lost confidence in himself. In a normal situation, black's chronic weaknesses should have suggested the simple castling instead of knight e5. Tarash writes, Lasker nervously forces the attack and allows his opponent counter chances. So knight e5 was played, knight h5 from Schlechter, and here comes g4. What a move. Kasparov writes, an anti-positional move. Lasker himself writes, when so much depends on one game, the players become very excited and their imagination transforms into recklessness. A reckless move from the world champion. Kasparov says, why not knight f6 here? A calm move. And he says, Steinitz would surely have played this move. But Schlechter takes on e5. And Lasker takes on h5. Kasparov writes, positional factors now retreat into the background, giving way to calculation and intuition. It's becoming crazy on the board. Bishop back to g7. Lasker took. Take back and queen c4. With threats on the g6 pawn. Because of the pin. And also a threat of taking on b7. And then taking on a6. Lots of tactics. Bishop c8, good move from Schlechter. And if you now take on g6, then there is bishop e6. Protecting f7, hitting the queen. You can play bishop takes f7 check. And taking back, although Kasparov thinks you should take back with the rook with crazy complications. But taking back with the bishop is a variation that was given also. Then queen takes a6 and bishop d5. It was given by Schlechter, this variation, and black has a strong attack according to him. But after bishop c8 there was no bishop takes g6. Lasker played rook g1, bringing the rook into play. A check from Schlechter. Bishop interposes and the queen to d5, taking any bishop takes g6 or rook takes g6 out of the equation because the f-pawn is no longer pinned. Rook c1, developing the bishop, and queen back to c2. Hove and Kasparov think that Lasker should have swapped the queens here. It's surprising because now the problem of the c-pawn is solved for black. And then f4. Yes, it's solving black's weak pawn on c6, but with the knight on a6, white has an enduring advantage, Kasparov writes. And without queens on the board, white's king, which is stuck in the center, is not such a problem for white. Interesting how these world champions think about the position. They solve a big problem for black, the c-pawn, but see that the position that arises after that is still better for white because of the bad knight on a6. And white's king is more happy with the queens off the board. Very instructive. But as said, Lasker retreated his queen to c2. The black queen went to g5. And now, look at this move. Bishop takes g6. Kasparov writes, Lasker underestimates black's counterplay. And we'll see in a few moves what happens if black takes that bishop. He first took on h2, hitting the rook. Rook stepped aside, and now he took the bishop. But then, you win the piece back with queen b3 check. A double attack on the bishop on b7. Rook interposes. Lasker takes his piece back. The other rook comes to the f-file. Black has now attacking chances against white king. And if you take that knight that's unprotected, that's not good because of rook takes f2, rook takes Rook takes. There's a mate threat with queen g1, and black has a winning position here. So, taking the knight on a6 is not good. Lasker saw that and played queen b3, pinning the rook on f7. King stepped aside on pinning the rook. f4 to take any captures on f2 out of the position. g5. It's a crazy game. Queen to d3. Schlechter took. Lasker took back. And a check. King e2. Another check. Rook interposes. And another check. And here the game was adjourned and resumed the next day. Rook interposes. Knight c7 on the way back into the game. And Lasker takes on c6. Takes that pawn. And Taraj writes something funny. He says, incredible! Lasker is threatened with destruction from every side and he's grabbing a pawn. Like a general who's under heavy fire and lights a cigar. Knight c5. Bringing that knight into the game is more sensible than taking the pawn. But Lasker took the pawn. Knight b5. Rook c4. And rook takes f4. A very crucial move in this game. Kasparov called it some kind of blackout. The combination is incorrect. Knight d6 would have been better, building up the pressure, and black has every chance to win this game. Rook takes f4 does not work. It costs an exchange. Lasker took it. Rook takes. Of course, this rook is pinned. Cannot take on f4. Lasker gave a check. Bishop interposed. And king f2, unpinning the rook. Kasparov writes, Lasker can breathe more freely now. A check. Black is still attacking. King e1 and queen h1 check, which gets a question mark from Kasparov. He says this is allowing the white king to escape from the checks. Very hard to see. And he says queen h4 check is at least a draw. That's how much compensation black has for the exchange. He still has an attack, and with queen h4 check he would have achieved a draw and would have won the match. He played queen h1 check. Rook interposed. Now queen h4 check. King to d2. The rooks were swapped and Schlechter took on d4. Queen interposed and Kasparov writes, for the first time after the wild complications started with 15 g4, Lasker has a better position. This is move 43. Another check. King d1 and knight d6. Rook c5. Kasparov explains how white is going to win his position. He says white's winning plan is to coordinate his forces, exchange queens, win the a-pawn, and advance his own passed pawn to the queening square. It's hard to prevent this plan, especially since Lasker carries it out with merciless consistency, while Schlechter is clearly disheartened. Let's see how the world champion does this. The bishop came to h6, rook d5, king move, knight c5, a check, and another check. King stepped away, bishop back to g7, knight comes in, another check, king a4, king f7, piece was swapped, queen b3, king e8. Now white gives a check and takes on a7. Kasparov writes, with the fall of the a7 pawn, black's position is now definitely lost. Lasker proceeds towards his goal with confident maneuvers of his heavy pieces. Let's see how he maneuvers his pieces without much commentary. I'll just go through the moves. Offering a queen trade. Black cannot afford to swap the queens. king c7 after this check. Now Lasker can force a queen exchange, but also after king d8, writes Kasparov, and then queen e6. The exchange of queens will soon be forced. But after the move from the game king c7, the exchange of queens came immediately through this check, hitting the queen at the same time, so black has to swap the queens. Rook takes back, and let's look at the remaining moves. And now king c5 from Lasker, and Schlechter called it a day and resigned here, trusting that Lasker would have the technique to convert this winning position. Kasparov calls it a titanic battle. Of course there were many mistakes, but what an intense struggle, and with what inventiveness both sides played. It was 5-all, 5 points each, and Lasker kept the world title, because in chess the world champion has to be beaten to be dethroned. A rule that lived on for many years. In fact, it was Kasparov himself who was saved by this rule when he drew with Karpov 12 points all in their 1987 match. But that story is for another day. Schlechter resigned here. It was Taraj who said, well, why not play on? I've seen this type of position fizzle out to a draw. But Schlechter did not believe that Lasker would mess up this position. And of course it's very likely that the world champion's endgame technique would be good enough to win this position. What a game. Hope you enjoyed it. A very exciting finish to the Lasker-Schlechter match, and as you can see, in the same year Lasker defended his title again, this time against Janowski, and that's what the next video is about. Hope you like this game and that you will keep counting down towards the Carlsen-Caruana match with me. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, please subscribe to the Chess to Impress channel, and please leave a comment. I will read them all and I will reply to them all. This is Rick for Chess to Impress. Thank you for watching.